Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. I'm ready to bind off the cuff of one of my Ready, Set, Go socks. So today I'll be demonstrating how to do the backstitch bind off. The backstitch bind off is a type of sewn bind off, which means I'll be using a yarn needle instead of a knitting needle to finish things up. This method creates a very elastic edge, so it's well suited for cuffs and collars where you may need a little bit of extra stretch to create a comfortable garment. Make sure to stay tuned all the way to the end because I'll be showing you how to neatly finish the bind off when you're working it in the round. Let's get started. To do the backstitch bind off, you'll need to leave a yarn tail that's 4 to 5 times longer than the edge that you're finishing. I always err on the side of being too long just to make sure I don't run out of yarn. And then thread your yarn tail onto a needle. Then to bind off, you're going to bring that yarn needle purlwise through 2 stitches, leaving those 2 stitches on your knitting needle. Pull the yarn through and make sure it doesn't get wrapped around your knitting needle. And then bring your yarn needle knitwise through 1 stitch, dropping it off the knitting needle and pulling the yarn through. Or I prefer to think about this in a different way and think of the saying 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So my yarn needle goes through 2 steps forward, pull the yarn through, and then I take 1 step back and drop the stitch off and pull the yarn through. 2 steps forward and 1 step back and drop the stitch off. And as you're binding off, just make sure you're not pulling the yarn tail too hard. You just want a nice even tension as you're pulling the yarn through. And continue taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back until there are 2 stitches remaining on your knitting needle. When you get to the final 2 stitches, again you'll take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And then if you're working in rows, you could simply take 1 final step forward, dropping the stitch off your needle, pull the yarn through, and then you could just weave in your yarn tail. However, when you're working in the round like I am, stopping at this point creates this jagged little stair step. So before I weave in the tail, I'm going to take 1 more step forward. I'm going to look for the very first stitch that I bound off, which is right here. Instead of coming forward in front of this, what looks like a little purl bump at the top, instead, I'm going to bring my needle through that same stitch, going in the same direction, but I'm behind that, what looks like a purl bar. And I'll pull the yarn through. And you can see already that that starts to close up that jagged little gap. And then I'm going to go back through that same final bound off stitch, and I could pull it apart here if I wanted to see it a little bit better. I'm going to go back, take that 1 step back through that final bound off stitch. Again, that just kind of creates a little ramp there, and it gets rid of that stair step and makes things a little bit neater. And now I could weave in my yarn tail at the back of my fabric. I hope you enjoyed learning how to do a backstitch bind off. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechillydog.com and look for the toe up version of my Ready, Set, Go socks. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!